You think you know how brutal ancient Rome was. You've heard of gladiator fights, crucifixions, and public beheadings. But what if I told you there were secret execution rituals so shocking, so calculated in their cruelty, that even Rome's fiercest enemies recoiled in disbelief? These were not random acts of violence, they were ceremonies, precise, rehearsed, and dripping with symbolism. To Rome, an execution wasn't just the end of a life. It was a message, a performance of fear, hidden away from the cheering crowds of the Colosseum, in torchlit chambers or remote military camps. Prisoners were prepared for deaths that carried more than pain. They carried humiliation. Some would be buried alive as offerings to the gods, their muffled screams echoing under the dirt. Others would be drowned in sacred rivers, their bodies claimed by the current as part of an ancient curse. These were punishments not meant for entertainment, but for domination, the kind of death that burned itself into the memory of friend and foe alike. And tonight, you're going to see them all. The burial alive ritual among Rome's most terrifying secret punishments was the burial alive. It was rare, reserved for those who had committed crimes not just against the state, but against the gods themselves. The most infamous victims were the Vestal Virgins, priestesses sworn to eternal chastity. Breaking that vow wasn't just sin, it was sacrilege. No Roman could spill the blood of a Vestal, so the Senate devised a loophole. The condemned would be placed in an underground chamber with a small lamp, a bed, and a meager ration of food and water. The entrance would be sealed, and then silence. Days would pass before the air grew stale, the lamp flickered out, and the earth swallowed them whole. This wasn't just execution, it was a slow erasure, hidden from public view, but whispered about in every corner of the city. The Romans believed such burials appeased the gods, turning divine wrath away from the empire. But for those trapped beneath the dirt, it was a living tomb, with the weight of Rome itself pressing down. Death by sac pona colle. Few Roman punishments were as grotesque or as symbolic as the pona colle, the penalty for parricide, killing one's own parent. To the Romans, this was the ultimate betrayal, a crime that shattered the natural order, and so the execution had to be just as unnatural. The condemned would be whipped, shackled, and sewn inside a large leather sack, but they would not be alone. Inside with them were 4 live animals, a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster. Each creature was chosen for a reason, the dog for loyalty betrayed, the snake for treachery, the monkey for chaos, and the rooster for the dawn the criminal would never see again. Once sealed, the sack was thrown into a river or the sea. Inside, panic erupted. The animals fought wildly, biting, clawing, and tangling with the doomed prisoner as the sack filled with water. To Rome, this was more than death. It was erasing the criminal from land and sky alike. No grave, no ashes, no name, only the memory of a punishment so horrific, it made even hardened enemies shudder. Strangulation in the Tullianum. Beneath the bustling heart of Rome lay a dark, airless stone chamber, the Tullianum to outsiders. It looked like nothing more than an ancient storage cellar. To Romans it was the empire's final waiting room for the condemned. When a prisoner was sentenced to death for treason, rebellion, or betrayal of the state, they would be dragged here in chains. The walls sweated with moisture, the air reeked of mold and iron, and the only light came from a small hole in the ceiling. There was no crowd, no cheering, no spectacle, only silence. A guard would loop a thick cord around the prisoner's neck, pull tight, and hold until the body went limp. No sword, no blood, just the cold, suffocating squeeze of state justice. The body would then be dumped unceremoniously down a narrow stone chute, landing in the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer. From there, the Tiber would carry it away. To the Roman mind, this wasn't just execution, it was purification. The traitors' blood would never stain the Forum, their body never foul Roman soil. They simply ceased to exist. Decimation, Rome's most ruthless military punishment in the Roman legions. Bravery was rewarded with honor, but cowardice was punished with something far worse than death. Decimatia. When a unit fled in battle or failed to obey orders, the commander could order the entire cohort to stand in formation. Then came the command that froze every soldier's blood. Draw lots. 1 in every 10 men, chosen at random, would be executed by their own comrades. It didn't matter if you were guilty or innocent, veteran or recruit. Fate decided. Those selected were forced to kneel while the rest of the unit, armed with clubs or stones, beat them to death in cold silence. The message was brutal and clear. The Roman army survives only through discipline, and fear binds it as tightly as loyalty. Decimation was so feared that it was rarely used. But when it was, It shattered the spirit of failure and rebuilt it in iron. For Rome, it was not cruelty for cruelty's sake, it was survival. Better to kill a few than let the entire legion rot from within. Ponacale death in the sack. Among Rome's most disturbing executions was the Ponacale, a punishment reserved for one crime above all, the murder of a parent. For the Romans, patricide was not just murder, it was the destruction of the family's sacred foundation, and for that, an ordinary execution would not suffice. The condemned was stripped, whipped, and then sewn into a large leather sack, but they were not alone. Inside the sack with them were a live dog, a rooster, a monkey, and a venomous snake, each chosen for symbolic reasons, each representing chaos and betrayal. Once tied shut, the sack was hurled into a river. Inside, the victim faced panic, claws, bites, and the slow crush of drowning in darkness. There was no audience to watch, no battlefield honor, only the chaotic frenzy of man and beast trapped together, sinking into oblivion. The Ponacule was not just a death sentence, it was a statement. Betray the blood that gave you life, and you will be erased in the most unnatural way possible. It was Roman justice at its most symbolic, and its most terrifying. Damnatio ad bestias, death by the beasts. If the Romans wanted an execution to both punish and entertain, nothing compared to damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. It was the ultimate public spectacle, held in vast amphitheaters before roaring crowds. Criminals, prisoners of war, and those accused of treason or sacrilege were thrown into the arena, unarmed, terrified, and exposed. Then the cages opened. Lions, leopards, bears, and even packs of wolves were unleashed, each starved and agitated to ensure maximum ferocity. The crowd roared as the condemned ran, dodged, and screamed. There was no hope of survival, only the certainty of being torn apart. Sometimes, the executioners added cruel twists, dressing victims in animal skins to make them appear like prey, or chaining them to posts so they could not flee. For the Romans, it was more than bloodsport. It was a public demonstration of state power, a reminder that Rome could destroy its enemies in ways as theatrical as they were final. To the victims, it was pure terror. To the spectators, it was entertainment. And to Rome, it was justice served with a roar. Crucifixion, death in slow motion. Of all Roman execution methods, crucifixion was the most drawn out, the most humiliating, and perhaps the most feared. It was not meant for swift justice, it was meant for suffering, reserved for slaves, rebels, and the lowest criminals. Crucifixion was designed to break both body and spirit. The condemned were first flogged until their flesh tore open, then forced to carry the heavy wooden crossbeam to the execution site. Once there, they were either tied or nailed through wrists and feet to the upright post. The pain was excruciating, but death did not come quickly. Victims could hang for hours, or days, their weight pulled against their lungs, making every breath a struggle. Dehydration, exhaustion, and exposure to the elements slowly acclaimed them. Crowds would gather to watch, mocking the condemned as they writhed in agony. Soldiers stood guard, ensuring no one dared to cut them down. When death finally came, often through suffocation or heart failure, the body was left hanging as a warning to all: defy Rome, and this is your fate. It was cruelty carved into the skyline. Justice, Roman style. The Roman Empire did not simply punish wrongdoers, it sent a message. Every execution was theater, every death a warning. Whether it was the slow agony of crucifixion, the spectacle of the arena, or the silent cruelty of exile, each method was carefully chosen to match the crime, and to instill fear in all who witnessed it. For Rome, justice was not just about removing a threat, it was about control, discipline, order. The empire thrived on the belief that defiance was futile, and their execution rituals ensured that belief took root in the hearts of subjects and enemies alike. These methods shocked even their fiercest opponents, but that was the point. Rome wanted its enemies to imagine the cross before they picked up a sword, to see the wild beasts in the arena before they raised a rebellion. 2,000 years later, these rituals still fascinate and horrify us. They are a reminder that the power of Rome did not just lie in its legions or its laws, but in the fear it could carve into the human soul. Rome ruled not only by the sword, but by the shadow it cast.